Okay, so West Hill has become a community that has taken on that role of handing values down to the next generation, of saying this is the stuff that is important to community, of recognizing the ways that community is fragmented, that we are isolated, that we lose a strong sense of well-being that we had when we were part of groups that we could recognize, that we saw ourselves belonging to. And I think that it's not hard to see some of the ills that community has suffered as a result of that loss. For me, the end game here is not a church. The end game is civic engagement. That's what I think is one of the most important things that we can give this generation and the generations to come, is our civic engagement. Do we engage if we don't feel good about ourselves? Do we engage if we don't know our neighbors? Do we engage if we have no idea what the issues are because we have no one to talk to about them, except we just see what's on the headlines on television or what comes across our Twitter feed? Like, do we engage if we don't feel confident and recognized and known? No, we don't. So I believe that we need communities that will do that, that will bring people together, get them into meaningful conversations, invite them to transform themselves, to come to an understanding of who they are in relationship to other people. So at West Hill, we work on relationship with ourselves, with others, and with the planet. And for me, when we strengthen that well-being, we invite people to become aware of the people around them, to engage in conversation, to reach out into the community, to become civically engaged. And that's, for me, that's the most important thing. So that's what we do at West Hill. And we had someone a couple of weeks ago come and spend time with us in the service. I didn't know he was there. But he was a journalist from the Presbyterian Record, and he went back and wrote an article which he posted on a private part of the site. And he noted that there's many similarities between West Hill and many other congregations, but he noted that the demographic looked the same, but the way we acted was totally different. That even when they were in the parking lot, somebody came up and introduced themselves to them and said hello, that the engagement in the building was very different from what they experience whenever they go to a regular Presbyterian church. And I think that's because the people who are there know that they are loved, that they are cared for, that what happens in their lives is important to the people who gather there with them. So it's not that they're particularly friendly, it's just they feel confident about who they are. And when they feel confident about who they are, they're comfortable reaching out and saying, hi, who are you? Right? Because they're not worried about it. So I think that's one of the most extraordinary things about West Hill. So what's happened with the United Church in the last little while? In 2001 is when I first came out to my congregation as not believing in God. In 2004, I helped form the Canadian Centre for Progressive Christianity, which Murray Gregory was the chair of that up until this year when we disbanded it. And that triggered some attention, right? Because I was clear with the press about what I believed. And so my denomination was put on notice in 2004. In 2005, a motion was brought to the presbytery to hear my beliefs. That was defeated, 14-11, which is a bit close, but anyway, it was defeated. And then I published a book in 2008 where I identified as a non-theist. I published another book in 2012 where I identified as a theological non-realist. All the time, you can hear me skating around the term atheist, right? Like I'm skating around it. And then in 2013, I learned that there were 4 authors in Bangladesh who had been arrested and were being threatened with execution because they were identified as atheists. They didn't identify as atheists, they were just secular humanists. They were just writers. But they were identified as atheists by extremist groups, and so they were arrested and threatened with execution. At the same time, Fazil Say, and there had been a murder just prior to that in Bangladesh. Fazil Say, an internationally renowned pianist from Turkey, had posted on Facebook that he was an atheist, and he was arrested and had been sentenced to 10 months in prison. So it concerned me that a label was being used to create these situations of hatred, to incite hatred and create situations of violence. And my beliefs were the equivalent of atheist beliefs. And my denomination had taught me that if you are ever in the situation where you should stand up and be in solidarity with people, you need to stand up and be in solidarity with people. So as a child of the United Church, I took that label publicly and identified as an atheist, saying to the United Church, to the world, to Bangladesh, you want to label those people atheists and go after them? You can come after me too. Because here I am, a quiet little minister in Scarberia in the winter, Scarlam in the summer. Here I am in a little church in the United Church of Canada. I'm nice. I have 2 children. I do everything right. You want to come after me because I'm an atheist? Give me a break. Unfortunately, my denomination didn't see it that way. They decided rather that was an issue. And they didn't even say it was an issue then, actually. They sort of let me do that for a while. And then the Charlie Hebdo attacks in January of 2015, that's when they got mad. Because I went to their website for some unknown reason. I don't know why. I was looking for something and went on their website. And here was this prayer to the survivors of the Charlie Hebdo attack. And it talked about reaching out to God for that kind of care and solace that only God could provide. And to me, it sounded, this is why I can't talk too loud. This one is warm. I'm going to get them. I know, but that's cold. I won't be able to talk. To me, it continued to use a language that divided our understandings one from the other. And it continued to posit that our moral authority was in some supernatural being. And so I wrote a letter saying, we got to get away from that. We've got to stop that because, you might say that your God would never do that. But if you're suggesting that there's a supernatural authority for our morality, then you have to step aside if somebody else is going to say that they have a supernatural authority for their morality, no matter how heinous their behavior may be, right? We can't keep this up. So we need to step away. I invited the moderator of our church to step away from the idolatry of language, of the word God, and to move beyond that so that we would not, in whatever way, be complicit in the kind of thing that happened in France that day. And that's what pissed them off, because they felt that it was arrogant and it was rude, and I was, taking down the moderator who never did reply to the letter. And then it garnered some more attention because it hit the press, and then the Toronto Star sent this young guy out who had no idea about anything about religion, and he published a piece which was picked up, and it had a couple of misquotes in it. Well, not big things, nothing really serious, but a talk show host in London went a little crazy about it, and then it got picked up, and then they started this review. And so the United Church of Canada, which has prided itself in being a non-creedal church, which has over and again stepped out into issues which would split communities across the nation, and invite that conversation to take place. I often speak about the United Church as a big table with a whole pile of people sitting at it and one empty chair. And that empty chair is the chair that the United Church always says, you're the person I don't want to hear from. I don't want to hear your story because it's going to change who we are. And I don't want to hear that. But here's the chair. Tell me the story. I don't want to hear it, but here's the chair. Tell me the story. And the United Church has given itself, it's challenged itself to listen to those stories over and over again at great cost to itself. It never occurred to me that this would be the story it didn't want to hear, that this would be the story that it turned its back on. In 2009, after my first book was out, I went to the national office and spoke with 2 staff people because I felt that it was important that we do something to protect clergy who had read my book, who were sending me emails saying, I'm coming out. I'm going to come out and tell my congregation I don't believe in God. The last straw was, I'm coming out on Palm Sunday. Not a good time, like that whole crucifixion thing the next week, like not good. So I went to talk to them about what we could do about that. And one of them eventually said to me, but Gretta, we don't really know that the United Church wants to go in a progressive direction. And I'm like, wait a minute, this is the United Church. Like, isn't that the only direction we've ever gone? Like, we don't know another direction. And he said, yeah, but you don't want a lily-white pew, do you? And I said, I'm not sure what you mean by that. And he said, well, if we're going to attract the immigrant population, we have to have a conservative theology. And I went, really? He said, the people in my pews that aren't lily-white are in my pews because you're the United Church of Canada, and because you embrace them, and because you stand for things that they believe in, and because maybe they've been rejected by their communities. Like, we're the United Church of Canada. What are you talking about? 7 years later, it's pretty clear what they were talking about, because they have moved in that direction. They felt that curve that Reginald Bibby, who's a sociologist, had written stuff about how, the churches that reflect the immigrant population are going to be the churches that grow, and we're going to have a lot more Catholics, and we're going to have a lot more evangelicals, and we're going to have a lot more Muslims. That's what the immigration patterns are, right? We're not getting a whole lot of WASPs anymore. And Reginald Bibby showed this graph of, here's the population of churches going like this. And there's a few little blips where we've got some immigrant stuff coming in, but it's basically going to be like this. And the United Church went, okay, we got to hang on to those little blips. Let's grab those little blips. That's what they went for. If they'd flipped that graph upside down, and instead of measuring the number of people in the pews, they were measuring these people who weren't in the pews, who seriously needed relationship, who seriously needed community, who were the people to whom we should have been handing our values and our beliefs and our understandings and challenging them to live out this beauty of this socially democratic state that we'd created here. Like, if they'd flipped the graph upside down and seen, oh, we're already at the door of that. Like, we've been teaching post-theistic theology for decades in the United Church of Canada. We're already there. All we have to do is ditch the language, and we're there. Like, it would have been so easy. But they forgot to do that. They forgot about the people who weren't in the church, and they decided to appeal only to the people who were already in it. And I think they lost who they were. I think they lost their soul. And so this process has put on the books at the United Church of Canada. It has set for the United Church a theological orthodoxy which has never been set before. There's only two ways you can review a minister in the United Church. One is for insubordination, and one is if they're not effective. So the General Secretary decided that you couldn't be effective if you weren't suitable, and you couldn't be suitable if you couldn't answer the questions of ordination, which have only ever been ceremonial. And those questions are now need to be answered literally, not with that essential agreement thing in place. So they put the questions to me, and I said, if by God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit you mean this? No, I don't believe in that. These are the things I believe in. And all of those things describe my United Church. But that's not the United Church to which I belong anymore. So we're waiting now for the outcome of that. And we'll see where the United Church goes and whither goest my congregation and I, along with that story. Anyway, that's just, I bounced around a little bit more than I intended to, but I think that's probably all I should say, and just invite you to now ask those questions, and we can have that conversation. I think if you're going to ask a question, I'll give you this so that we can get, or I can repeat it, I guess. And then we'll get it on record, what it is. So anyway, thoughts, questions. Some of you have been at West Hill, some of you haven't. One of the things we did last year, because we're way out in the east end of the city, we launched a satellite community in Mississauga, which is now just on the edge of Etobicoke. And we meet there once a month. On the third Sunday of the month, we have kind of what's called a dinner church, sort of, only without the liturgy. And we're now working to create a weekly group that meets in the core of the city, in the core of Toronto. We joined the Oasis Network back in February, and that's a piece of work that we're working on now, because we think that civic engagement is the end game, and that you get to that through meaningful community. So, yes?
Can you explain, Stan, you can hear. Can you explain how you see your position as it relates to that of Society of Friends and Unitarians?
Okay, can I say how I see my position as it relates to the Society of Friends and Unitarians? Okay, I get lots of emails from Unitarians inviting me to become a Unitarian, and not so much the Society of Friends, but I know that we'd have an easy relationship, I'm quite sure. One of the reasons why I've stayed in the United Church is because I'm loyal to the United Church and I believe in the United Church. And my experience of Unitarians is that they hang on to a language of reverence, is the way that some Unitarian leaders have spoken of that to me. And that language of reverence is generally a theistic language. They still use the word God, and I don't use that word anymore. I find it a barrier. And that, the United Church has worked at taking barriers away, but they don't understand the removal of that as a barrier. And they don't understand that it could be someone who is a believer who decided to do this work in this congregation, right, by removing a barrier, which was the language. It doesn't matter what I believe, really. It's that we've created a community that it has one less barrier. So the Unitarian principles, I'd be proud to be judged by the Unitarian principles. Clearly, I mean, they're beautiful, but it's mostly the language thing that is still a barrier there. Yeah. Yes. Okay.
So if the United Church's decision doesn't go favorably for you, which I'm assuming would mean to be continuing with your work as it is, have you thought about what you'd like to do, or?
Yeah, so the question is, what if the United Church's decision isn't favorable? Have I thought what I would like to do besides sue them? Oh, I didn't say that. Blah, blah, blah. You didn't hear that. No. The United Church has already found me unsuitable, according to their new way that they discern that. So I don't know what can happen other than something bad. I mean, that you can't really, you can't hire a kindergarten teacher that you've decided is not suitable as a kindergarten teacher, and you can't hire a physics professor who is not suitable as a physics professor. I mean, you can't have a minister who's not suitable as a minister in one of your churches. So I'm not anticipating that it's going to go very well. Right from the beginning, we asked for a dialogue, and we were denied every time we asked for that, and we asked for it again last Thursday when I spoke to them. We asked for a dialogue again. They may decide that there's time for a dialogue, but they can't overturn the finding of my unsuitability. So I think that's a given. So what will happen? I do what I do. I mean, I gather people together and I help them find one another. I help them find themselves. I help them find a place where they can create meaning in their lives. And I'll continue to do that. And I'll do it. I may do it within the community at West Hill, where I am now. I may do it in the core community in downtown Toronto that we're creating. I may do it wherever, and I'll continue to write, I think. But I think that the most important thing is bringing people together, and that's where my passion is. So I will try to do that in whatever way I can. Yeah. Just a sec, Mr. Atheist, you had a question? That was good?
Trying to get your attention.
Oh, okay, yes.
It was only one question.
One question, okay, that's fine.
As a pastor, people expect to listen to something every Sunday morning from you. So what kind of topic, if it's not Christian topic?
That's interesting. That's a very good question, because that's what my colleagues say. Well, if you're not preaching on the Bible, what's there to talk about? What's there to talk about? Like everything. So that's right. Yeah, they do. They come. So we've been, the last several weeks, we've been doing the mindfulness attitudes. So each week, the first week it was non-judging. The next week it was patience. Next week it was beginner's mind. The next week it was trust. Then it was non-striving. I don't know. I've lost track now. But last week was then there was acceptance, and then there was generosity. This week is gratitude. So we're working through that series, right? Christopher DiCarlo, who's an atheist, he spoke for 3 Sundays in July while I was away, so he shared on topics for that. Generally, we're values-based, so it's something to do with values. every week, and this project has really been kicked around by this process because it's interfered with my work and my ability to be creative. But every week, a clergy person in a church, in most of the mainline denominations, not so much the evangelicals, though they are dipping into it a little bit more, there's a set series of texts from the Bible that can be used, and it's called the lectionary. And so each Sunday, I will read the readings for next year's Sunday, and I will distill from them a theme that has to do with values, that has to do with creating a meaningful life, that has to do with something to do about how we want to live as better people, with all of the challenges and the defeats that are incorporated in that. And so I'll bring that theme out, and then I find alternate readings. I mean, most of my readings come from Goodreads, or they come from books that I have at home, or novels, or things that I mark a passage and then I'll use it. So I come up with quotes and readings, and I try to rewrite a traditional hymn tune so that people have, and I'm doing it for my colleagues who want to have a post-theistic resource, who want to lead in a post-theistic way without letting anybody really know that's what they're doing. So they'll read the scriptures, so it looks and smells and wags its tail like church, but then the message that's coming out doesn't have to have those traditional belief triggers in them. It doesn't have to. You don't have to sing songs that talk about salvation, and you don't have, So if I can write those resources and make them available to my colleagues, they could use them. I'm not sure that many are interested in them right now. Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering about the role of prayer. Is that eliminated in your gatherings?
Yeah. Well.
With meditation?
Yeah, we do. We have a time in the service that's called community sharing. I was very sick in 2012, and when I came back, they had changed the community prayer time to the community sharing time. I guess they hadn't been praying for me. I don't know. Anyway, but what we do is when I arrived there, they had a box that people would put notes in the hall, and then at the beginning of the service, people would tell me stuff, and then I'd turn it into prayer on the spot. So now people stand up and they just say what's going on, like what's going on in their minds, like what's happening in their lives. Where are the celebrations and those beautiful moments that if you share it, it's going to make somebody else feel better because it's fabulous, it's lovely, and it made your life, sing for a day, right? Or if you're going through something that's really terrible, you share that, right? And we have these little responses that are just like in a traditional church. And we wrap each other. I see it as encouragement, where we wrap our hearts around each other. That's how I see that time. And I think actually I've seen that efficacy of that prayer far more than I ever saw any efficacy in any other kind of prayer, right? Because someone stands up and says that, they've had a diagnosis and someone else is there because they've walked that same journey, or they have there's a woman in our congregation who cuts all the time, right? And she'll get up and she'll talk about that, and people will be present to her because it's a powerful moment of I need you, and so people are there. I find it very powerful and very moving the way these people stand up and offer themselves to each other.
When you were initially talking about the 5 things that the church does that are essential and that should be adopted by the community at large, the first thing you mentioned was transmitting heritage and so on and so forth. Isn't there a danger that basically, first of all, by definition, a church cannot really reach people who are outside the church and are of other heritages, and basically you end up perpetuating divisions even with the best of intentions?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally recognize where you're going. And I think that the thing that we've done at West Hill, there's a group identity piece here that is very important. Recognizing that you're part of a group makes you feel more comfortable, and you'll be more vulnerable, and you'll be able to engage better. So when you go into a Catholic church, all of those different things that happen, they're all things telling you that you belong because you recognize them and you feel comfortable in them. So at West Hill, we've created some of those things, right? But they're all very accessible. You don't have to be told how to do them. They're just there. So people identify themselves. So the things that we feel are important to transmit are less about language and about ritual and symbol as they are about the values that we've expressed using those things these many generations. So I want to transmit to you the value of compassion. That's far more important to me than teaching you how to kneel properly or how to do something with, we've got artwork that you can interact with. Interacting with that artwork is not the important thing to me. Helping you learn how to live with compassion is the more important.
But isn't there a limitation because you can't teach outside of people who have originally, let's say, Christian background or Jewish, or like basically you cannot teach to other traditions that are outside the church by having it within the church. So that's what I'm getting at. It's like there are certain boundaries that maybe there are other people in other communities that are trying to do the same thing.
Right.
But because
we're in a church, people think and it's true. You want to stop? You want us to stop again?